They said if I marry you, I lose everything, and I don't know how to lose them without losing you too.
When someone promises to marry you, you start living inside a future that hasn't happened yet. You don't notice the exact day it happens. It's not when they say the words, or when you start looking at rings online, or when you bookmark a picture of a dress you'll never admit you like. It happens slowly, quietly, in the spaces between plans and jokes and casual mentions of someday. One day you wake up and realize your present is just the waiting room for the life you've already moved into in your head. That was me with Liam before I met him. Marriage was something that happened to other people with color-coordinated Pinterest boards and parents who could pay for venues that smelled like fresh flowers and old money. I grew up watching my parents juggle overdue bills and night shifts, not tasting wedding cakes on weekends. Love, in their world, was not ceremony. It was survival. My mother fell asleep on the couch in scrubs, my father reheated leftovers at 2 a.m., and in the mornings they kissed each other's foreheads before starting again. They never had the time or money to worry about matching napkin rings. So when I met Liam in a crowded cafe one rainy Thursday, the last thing on my mind was marriage. I was just trying to keep my stack of essays from absorbing his spilled coffee. He apologized too many times, offered to pay for my drink, then stayed to talk while my pages dried in a little paper cemetery on the chair beside me. He was funny in a way that didn't require an audience, and surprisingly interested in the emotional lives of bored 16-year-olds forced to read classic novels. He told me he worked for his family's company, but said it like he was confessing a minor crime. For the first year, his last name meant nothing to me. Hartford could have been any name. He met me in my world, a tiny rented apartment, buses that never came on time, grocery store wine, secondhand furniture. He came to school plays and clapped loudly. He helped me carry home boxes of donated books. He saw the cracked tiles and leaning shelves of my life and treated them like they were charming. Not embarrassing. It was only when I saw his parents' house that I understood how far apart our starting lines had been. Their home wasn't just big. It was deliberate. The kind of place commissioned, not purchased. Gated driveway, towering door, the sort of manicured lawn that looked like it had an alarm system of its own. Walking up to it felt like approaching an institution rather than a home. Inside, everything was tastefully arranged and faintly intimidating. Art that probably had Providence documentation. Rugs that cost more than my annual salary, staff who moved quietly in the background. His parents received me like a guest at a formal interview. His mother was impeccably put together, every hair in place, voice smooth and careful. She asked polite questions that hovered safely above anything personal. His father was courteous but distant, his attention more on Liam than on me, as though I were just an interesting attachment on his son's arm. They were not unkind, exactly, they were. Evaluating, I told myself it was normal. I was the first serious partner their son had brought home. I didn't expect them to throw their arms around me, but I could feel the gap between us in the way his mother's eyes lingered a fraction too long on my off-the-rack dress, in the way his father's interest sharpened when I mentioned my parents' jobs, as if he was mentally categorizing our entire family in seconds. Still, I left that first dinner believing they would come around. I'd spent years winning over skeptical parents at parent-teacher nights. I knew how to connect, how to listen, how to show people I was on their side. I assumed I was dealing with normal human skepticism, the kind that shrinks once it knows you. Time, as it turned out, does not fix everything. Sometimes it just gives people more hours to entrench themselves. Liam and I built a life in the spaces between our worlds. We had a rhythm, my schedule dictated by school bells and exam weeks, his by meetings, travel, and a never-ending stream of family obligations. He came home exhausted from days spent in boardrooms and charity galas where conversations revolved around deals, legacies, and names I'd only ever seen in headlines. At night, he sat on my couch in sweats, eating overcooked pasta, listening to me recount teenage, drama about crushes and essays and cafeteria. Politics like it was the most important news in the world. He talked, about his family's company the way people talk about, something they are both proud of and resentful toward. It was an inheritance and a prison sentence rolled into one. His father had been grooming him for leadership since childhood, educating him in balance sheets and strategy instead of bedtime stories. The expectation was simple: he would marry someone who made sense on paper, someone whose last name already belonged in their network, someone who fit into the list of alliances they'd quietly curated for years. I learned that part later, the night he proposed didn't look anything like the staged perfection people post online. There was no photographer hiding in the bushes, no rooftop, no string lights. It was just us on my sofa after his sister's engagement party, both of us half out of our formal clothes. He'd come back from the dinner more tired than usual, loosened his tie like it was choking him, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then, in the middle of my rant about how many times they'd used the word appropriate to describe his sister's fiancé, he turned to me and said he didn't want that life. Not like that. He said he wanted a small kitchen, shared bills, a life built on real conversations instead of strategic conversations over dessert. He said he wanted to marry me, not as an act of rebellion, not to shock his family, but because he wanted decades of ordinary days with me more than he wanted their approval. There was no ring, no speech, just tired honesty and the weight of years of loneliness in his eyes. I said yes without needing anything else. We decided to keep it between us for a while. He wanted to wait until his sister's wedding was over, then tell his parents. He was sure they would resist at first, but he believed they would eventually see what he saw. Love can make even very intelligent people naively optimistic. Planning in secret felt both thrilling and fragile. We met in cafes and scrolled through pictures of venues on my old laptop, talking about colors and guest lists and food. I showed him tiny places strung with fairy lights and mismatched chairs. He showed me small estates that somehow still looked intimidating. We tried to find a middle ground that looked like both of us. We didn't book anything. We didn't pick a date. It was more like sketching, imagining the shape of a life we trusted would become real. Then his mother opened his laptop. She wasn't supposed to, obviously. She told him later she'd only wanted to print something, that she hadn't meant to snoop. Intentions aside, she found a folder named after me, full of vendor links, notes, half-written vows, and a draft guest list that did not resemble the Hartford social directory. That was the moment the quiet war began. He told me about the confrontation in pieces, his voice flat with disbelief. His parents had not yelled. They didn't need to. They questioned. They dissected. They turned our private dream into a spreadsheet of pros and cons. They focused on my background, my job, my family. They used words like fit and image and expectations. They were terrified, it seemed, that generations of careful positioning would be undone by one woman who graded essays and rented a walk-up. They framed their disapproval as protection. Of him, of the company, of me. They spoke about reputations and responsibilities. They reminded him of the trust fund, the shares, the influence. Everything he touched, professionally and personally, was tied up in things they controlled. They made it very clear that choosing me in the way he had promised to choose me would mean walking away from all of it. He told them he didn't care at first. He said he was old enough to build his own life. His father responded by laying out, in excruciating detail, how entwined that life already was with theirs. The apartment he lived in, the projects he was leading, the opportunities he had taken for granted, they were all rooted in the empire they had constructed. Cutting him off wasn't just symbolic. It meant dismantling the structure he stood on when he came to see me that night. He looked like someone who had just been told the ground beneath him was optional, listening to him. I understood something that had been blurry until then. My fight was simple. I had nothing to lose but him. His fight was complicated in a way I had never experienced. His entire identity, from childhood, had been shaped around being part of that machine. Asking him to walk away from it overnight was like asking someone to step off a moving train in the dark. But some choices cannot be half made. Behind every delayed decision, there is often a fear no one wants to look at directly. In his case, it was the fear of being ordinary, of failing without the safety net, of disappointing people who had spent his whole life telling him that everything they had was for him on the condition that he played by their rules. I tried to be patient at first. I told myself that he needed time to dismantle a lifetime of conditioning. I tried to understand that his silence with them was not necessarily indifference toward me, but shock. Yet days turned into weeks, and every conversation we had about the future became a variation of the same theme. Once things calmed down, once he had convinced them, once they understood how serious we were, the uncomfortable truth was that they understood perfectly. They just didn't care. In their world, love was an accessory to be negotiated, not the core of a decision. Eventually, holding space for his fear started to feel indistinguishable from holding still for my own abandonment. So I drew the border he wouldn't. I told him, as calmly as I could, that I would not stay in a limbo of his making. I would not be the secret almost wife his parents hoped would quietly disappear while they lined up more suitable candidates. If he wanted the life he had described to me on my couch, he would have to accept the cost of stepping outside their design. No more waiting for a perfect moment that would never come. His answer was honest and devastating. He didn't dress it up. Underneath all his explanations and apologies, it came down to this. He was not ready to lose what they were threatening in order to keep what he had promised me. It's strange how clarity can feel both like relief and like being hit by a truck. After he left that night, I walked around my apartment touching tiny artifacts of our almost life. A note he left in a book, a mug he always used, the open tab on my browser with a venue that had trees wrapped in lights. The imagined version of our wedding, the one that had been living rent-free in the back of my mind, started dissolving. The dress I hadn't bought, the vows I hadn't written, the photos we hadn't taken, they all vanished in one quiet evening. Grieving a future is different from grieving a person. He was still alive, somewhere across town, still rich, still loved by the people who had told him I would never be enough. But the version of him who had looked at me and said he wanted to share cereal and arguments about curtains for decades, that person was gone. Or maybe he had never really existed outside of a moment of courage that couldn't survive pressure. In the months that followed, I did what people do when their lives crack. I went back to work. I taught teenagers about characters who chose duty over love, or love over duty, or something messier in between. I listened to my students argue passionately about what the protagonists should have done, and sometimes I wanted to laugh at how simple it sounded when it wasn't their own skin on the line. I avoided the parts of town where his parents' world built itself higher and shinier. I stopped going to the cafe where we met because the staff knew us as a pair and I didn't want their pity. He reached out a few times. Long messages about fights with his parents, about lines he was starting to draw, about the realization that his life had never truly belonged to him. He said he still loved me. He said he would fix it. I believed the love. I didn't believe the timeline. Slowly, his updates became less frequent. Not out of malice, but because life kept moving for both of us. The emergency intensity of our break ebbed into something quieter. Silence has a way of moving in when two people are trying to unhook their hearts from each other without causing permanent damage. One day, almost a year later, I saw his last name trending in a small business article. He had stepped down from some official position at the company to start something on his own. The article framed it as a bold entrepreneurial move. I recognized it as something else, a late attempt to reclaim his life from the people who thought they owned it. I didn't reach out. A few weeks after that, I bumped into them in a grocery store. Ordinary fluorescent lights, a basket of generic groceries in his hand, no tailored suit, no body language that screamed air. He looked older and younger at the same time, tired in the eyes, looser in the shoulders. There was no cinematic swelling of music, no sudden realization. Just two people who once thought they'd share a surname, standing between shelves of cereal, we talked briefly. He told me he had moved out of his parents' house, that he was learning how rent worked when it wasn't a line item in a trust. He admitted he had been cowardly when I needed him to be brave. He said he understood now what it meant to build a life that didn't depend on their approval. I listened. I believed him. I also knew that courage delayed felt different than courage offered when it was asked for. There's a version of this story where we get back together there, in that aisle, where his growth and my forgiveness collide. And the promise he made on my couch finally has a chance to be fulfilled. People like that version. It fits what they want to believe about love conquering all. My life did not become that version. We left the store with a careful hug and an unspoken agreement. We had been important to each other. We had shaped each other. But the bridge between what we were and what we could be now was too damaged to cross safely. He kept walking toward the life he was finally choosing on purpose. I kept walking toward a life where being chosen did not require anyone else's permission. For a long time, I carried the story as proof that I had not been enough. His parents' no sounded like a verdict on my entire existence. Every time I saw a photo of him at some event with other polished people, I wondered if one of the women in the background had been approved to stand where I had not. It took time to understand that their refusal was never really about me. They would have rejected anyone who did not fit the shape they had carved out for their son. I happened to be the person he fell in love with. At the same time, he realized his life wasn't his own. He promised to marry me. Then his family said no. He chose not to defy them when it mattered most. That is the blunt structure of what happened. What I carry forward from it is something softer but sharper. Next time someone promises me a future, I will listen less to the poetry of their words and more to the volume of their spine. I will watch how they stand when the people who raised them push back. I will not confuse love with capacity. You can feel something deeply and still not be strong enough to honor it. The day I finally accepted that, the promise stopped feeling like a broken spell and started feeling like a lesson. Not that I was unworthy, but that I am not a compromise. If someone has to choose between keeping me and keeping their comfort, I have no interest in being the thing they sacrifice to stay safe. I would rather sit in my small kitchen alone, surrounded by the quiet of a life I built myself, then wait in the foyer of someone else's empire for a door that was never meant to open for me.